Hannah here. This is the first of a series of Insta Reels that are also going to go on Facebook. In these Reels, I'm going to read excerpts from different travelers who went to Egypt and saw the ruins from roughly 1700 to about 1930-ish. I hope that you will enjoy hearing these echoes of Egypt and how the landscape and the sites have changed over time, but also, fingers crossed, that you will be inspired to donate to my GoFundMe campaign for a second Egyptology masters. Before I dive into the accounts, I want to give you some historical and social context. So one of the main biases that you see through these accounts also relates to one of Egyptology's larger themes, which is from its very beginning, its entanglement and connections with Western imperialism and colonization. So we're going to start with some important dates to kind of give you some context, and then some assumptions that I've found running through a lot of these accounts, whether they are from an American or British or even French perspective, as well as some of these other Western nations that particularly in the 19th century start to stream into Egypt as a tourist destination. So the beginnings of Egyptology as a Western field, and there is more and more scholarship now being done on the contributions of medieval Arabic scholars and Muslim scholars as well to different aspects of Egyptology. But Egyptology in the West as a discipline is generally dated to Napoleon's military expedition and occupation of Egypt from roughly 1798 to 1805. Napoleon's military aims for this expedition failed, but what did come out of it was the Description de l'Egypte, which was a multi-volume work that laid out a lot of the cultural sites of Egypt with a good number of images. So for a lot of the Western world, this was their first major glimpse into Egypt's kind of deep past in terms of visual feast for kind of the eyes. When Napoleon arrived in Egypt, it was technically under the rule of the Ottoman dynasty. Partly as a result of Napoleon's expedition, you have a local family that is sent to watch over Egypt as one of the Ottoman provinces. And the main gentleman that started this was named Muhammad Ali. And so he basically created a semi-independent dynasty and became the real ruler of Egypt. So Muhammad Ali and his dynasty controls Egypt from roughly 1805. So in the time around the time that Napoleon flees Egypt with kind of his tail between his legs to about 1882. Then from roughly 1799 to 1830, you have Britain and France that are basically eyeing Egypt and fighting over who should have the control because the Ottoman Empire is growing weaker in both political and military strength. By 1839, you have the European powers, and particularly Britain, have their first sort of stronghold as an imperialist power on the Egyptian state. By 1848, roughly, the British have sort of won the political fight to control a lot of the apparatus of the Egyptian state. And the sort of sweetener that they give the French is, okay, you can stay in control of the antiquities and basically a lot of the cultural stuff. In 1854, we have the first railway route in Egypt, and the railways are one of the main ways that these Western powers increase their control of Egypt and Egypt's infrastructure, not just kind of on the outskirts or just of the country or the coast, but in the interior of Egypt. In 1859, you have construction of the Suez Canal starts. That's another big thing that allows, again, these Western nations to control a lot of Egypt's infrastructure and really advance their power. By 1869, the Suez Canal is fully built. And also in 1869, the company Thomas Cook and Sons, which starts out as a tourism company that sees sites in England. So Thomas Cook, who's the founder of the company in 1869, uses his company to take the first group of tourists to Egypt. And so that marks the arrival and sort of the official age of Egypt as a British tourist destination, as kind of part of Britain's wider empire type possessions. By 1879, Britain has officials in place in Egypt, and then the official British occupation is normally dated to around 1882, because that's when they send military forces in. By 1892, you have criticism against the British occupation and the stirrings of the independence movement in Egypt. In 1914 through 1918, you have World War I, and as part of that kind of larger geopolitical scene, and in part because of security concerns, in 1914, Egypt is declared a protectorate of Great Britain. 1919 to 1922 are usually the dates given for basically the formal independence movement in Egypt. So you have the leaders of the Egyptian nationalist movement that say that, hey, we should be an independent country now. And there's been some scholarship done on how those leaders of Egypt's independence movement try to kind of use Egypt's antiquity and the kind of the symbols of ancient Egypt to argue for independence as well. In 1922, that independence movement is successful. The UK declares Egypt, or is mostly successful. The UK declares Egypt independent, and Fuad the First is proclaimed king of Egypt. However, Western forces, including British soldiers, still control the Suez Canal. So it's not until the 1950s when Egyptian forces take full control of the Suez Canal that Egypt is actually a fully independent country, because that's when they fully control all their infrastructure. In 1969, Zahi Hawass becomes the first Egyptian head of the Antiquity Service. So earlier I was talking about how by roughly halfway through the 19th century, so halfway through the 1800s, Britain had basically won the political control of Egypt, and then the kind of sweetener they gave the French was that, okay, you can stay in charge of all the cultural stuff and kind of the antiquity side of things. And so one of the ways that they did that was the Antiquities Service that was largely somewhat a Western creation and definitely controlled by Western forces, the French basically monopolized the antiquities service and the leadership positions, including being the head of the antiquities service. So that's why it's a big deal when you have in 1969 an Egyptian, Dr. Zahi Hawass, actually becoming head of the country's antiquities service. I will say that Dr. Zahi Hawass, his tenure is controversial, and he, after the 2010 revolution, he was displaced as kind of the part of larger political machinations. So he is a controversial figure. But knowing this imperialist and colonial background does give you some context for why, as soon as he stepped into the post, he was as vocal as he was about repatriation and giving some of those objects back to Egypt that basically were symbols of the country that ended up in Western museums. All right, so I'm going to end this video because it's already been a little over 10 minutes. And then my next video is going to go over some of the themes some of the assumptions that I've found as I've read through these different travel accounts, whether they're written from an English or French or German or American or ex-Western nationality, and some of the language that you'll find in these accounts as well. So hopefully I will see you next time.